My boss told me I was overstepping by doing tasks outside my job description, so I stopped. 3 weeks later, I watched 40,000 gallons of water pour through the ceiling of our executive conference room, and I didn't lift a finger to stop it, because technically, that wasn't my job anymore. I worked as a facilities coordinator for Meridian Property Group, a mid-sized commercial real estate company that managed about 30 office buildings across the metro area. My official job description was pretty straightforward: coordinate vendor schedules, process work orders, maintain equipment logs, and handle routine maintenance requests. But here's the thing about facilities work: the job description never covers what you actually do. Over my 6 years at Meridian, I'd become the unofficial everything guy. I knew every building's quirks. I knew that the HVAC system in Tower C made a weird clicking noise every Tuesday at 2 p.m., and it was fine. But if it clicked on a Friday, you had about 4 hours before the compressor seized. I knew which elevator in Building 7 liked to trap people between floors and how to manually override it. I knew that the fire suppression system in our headquarters had a pressure sensor that would false alarm if the temperature dropped below 42 degrees in the mechanical room. I knew all of this because I paid attention. I cared. And for 6 years, that knowledge saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in emergency repairs, after-hours call-outs, and potential disasters. My direct supervisor was a guy named Tom Reeves. Tom was fine. Not great, not terrible, just a middle manager coasting toward retirement. We had a decent working relationship. He let me do my thing, and I made him look good. Then corporate restructured. They brought in a new regional operations director named Patricia Holbrook. Patricia came from some Fortune 500 company where she'd apparently been a rising star. She was 43, wore blazers that cost more than my monthly rent, and had never once set foot in a mechanical room. Patricia's entire philosophy could be summed up in one phrase she repeated constantly: lane discipline. She was obsessed with the idea that every employee should stay rigidly within their defined role, no overlap, no initiative outside your specific duties. According to Patricia, when people colored outside the lines, it created inefficiency, confusion, and liability. 2 months after she arrived, Patricia called me into her office. "Marcus," she said, sliding a printed document across her glass desk, "I've been reviewing your activity logs and I have some concerns." I looked at the papers. It was a list of every task I'd completed over the past quarter that fell outside my official job description. "You've been performing minor electrical repairs," she said, tapping a manicured nail on the page. "That's a licensed electrician's job." "Those were simple fixes," I explained, "replacing outlet covers, resetting breakers, the kind of stuff that would cost us a $200 service call for 5 minutes of work." "It doesn't matter. You're not a licensed electrician." She flipped to another page. "You've also been adjusting thermostat programming, which should go through our HVAC contractor. You've been checking roof drains, which is the responsibility of our roofing maintenance vendor. And according to this," she held up an email I sent to Tom, "you personally inspected the fire suppression system in the headquarters building and recommended a sensor replacement." "Because the sensor was failing," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "If it malfunctions during a cold snap, we get a false discharge. That's not a minor inconvenience. The system uses clean agent suppression in the server room. One false trigger and we're looking at $50,000 in agent replacement, plus potential damage to equipment, plus the building gets evacuated." Patricia smiled the way people smile when they've already made their minds. "Marcus, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're not a fire suppression technician. You're not qualified to make those assessments. What you're doing creates liability for this company." "I've been doing this for 6 years. And that's 6 years of exposure we're lucky hasn't resulted in a lawsuit." She leaned back in her chair. "Going forward, I need you to operate strictly within your job description. Coordinate vendors, process work orders, maintain logs, that's it. If you see something that seems like a problem, you submit a work order and let the appropriate licensed professional handle it." "Some of these things are time sensitive." "Then the work order should reflect that urgency. Let the system work, Marcus." I left her office with my jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a molar. The next day, I submitted a work order for the fire suppression sensor. Priority level, high. Recommended action, immediate inspection, and probable replacement. The work order went into the queue. Our contracted fire safety vendor was scheduled to come out in 6 weeks. 6 weeks! I flagged it for Tom. Tom shrugged and said Patricia had final approval on all expedited service requests, and she'd denied it. "Sensor's probably fine," he said. "It hasn't actually failed yet, right?" I tried to escalate. I sent an email to Patricia directly explaining the risk. She responded with a single line: "Work order submitted, system is functioning as designed." So I stopped. I stopped checking the pressure gauges during my rounds. I stopped poking my head into mechanical rooms to listen for warning signs. I stopped doing the dozens of small, unofficial things that kept our buildings running smoothly. I became exactly what Patricia wanted: a work order processor. 3 weeks later, the temperature dropped. It was early March, one of those freak cold snaps that catches everyone off guard. Forecasts said overnight lows in the 20s. I saw it coming. I knew exactly what would happen. I submitted a work order recommending that someone check the mechanical room temperature and possibly place a space heater near the suppression sensor. Priority level, routine, because according to Patricia, I wasn't qualified to assess urgency. The work order sat in the queue. On a Thursday at 7:43 a.m., I was at my desk when my radio crackled. Security was reporting some kind of alarm in the executive wing. I pulled up the building monitoring system and watched the alerts cascade across my screen. The fire suppression system had triggered. Okay, I need to pause right here, because I'm sitting at my desk watching these alerts pop up, and I know exactly what's happening. I know the sensor failed. I know the system is about to discharge thousands of gallons of water through the sprinkler heads in the executive conference room. And I also know, per Patricia's direct orders, that fire suppression systems are not my job. So tell me, what would you do? Subscribe if you think I was right to stay in my lane like she demanded, or drop a comment if you think I should have broken protocol, because what happened next destroyed more than just a conference room. I sat at my desk and watched. The alerts kept coming. Suppression system discharge in Zone 7. That was the executive wing. Water flow detected. Secondary alarms triggered. Building evacuation initiated. My radio exploded with chatter. Security asking what was happening. The receptionist panicking about water coming through the ceiling. Someone shouting about the server room. I picked up my radio and called Tom. "Hey, I'm seeing some suppression alerts in the executive wing. Should I submit a work order?" There was a long pause. "Marcus, what? Just get up there." "That's not in my job description," I said calmly. "Fire suppression systems are handled by our licensed vendor. I can give you their emergency contact number if you'd like." I could hear him sputtering. "Marcus, this is an emergency." "Then you should probably call that vendor." I hung up. Now, I'm not a monster. I knew the building was evacuating. I knew no one was going to get hurt. This wasn't a real fire. It was a sensor malfunction triggering a false discharge, exactly like I'd warned about, exactly like I'd submitted work orders about, exactly like I'd tried to prevent before Patricia told me to stay in my lane. The conference room was destroyed. 40,000 gallons of water, pressurized, dumping through ceiling tiles. The room had been set up for a major investor presentation scheduled for that afternoon. Custom displays, prototype materials, expensive AV equipment, all of it ruined. But that wasn't the worst part. The server room was 2 floors directly below. Our building had 2 suppression zones in the executive wing. Zone 7 covered the conference rooms and offices. Zone 8 covered the server room. When Zone 7 discharged, the water followed gravity. It found every crack, every cable conduit, every gap in the floor. By the time someone thought to check, 2 inches of water had pooled around servers that housed our property management database, our tenant billing system, and 6 years of financial records. The damage estimate came in at $3.8 million. Patricia was in the building when it happened. She'd been in her office on the 3rd floor when the alarms went off. I heard later that she had to wade through the lobby in her designer heels, past emergency responders and panicking employees, while the CFO screamed into his phone about the investor presentation. The investigation started immediately. Here's the beautiful thing about malicious compliance. When you do exactly what you're told, you create a paper trail. I had every email, Every work order, every request I'd submitted, and every denial I'd received. I had Patricia's direct instruction to stay within my job description. I had her email dismissing my concerns about the sensor. I had the work order I'd submitted 3 weeks earlier, still sitting in the queue marked routine because I wasn't qualified to assess urgency. The insurance company's investigator was a no-nonsense woman named Claire who looked like she'd seen every trick in the book. She sat down with me on the second day, recorder running, and asked me to walk her through the timeline. So I did. I showed her the maintenance logs before Patricia arrived, 6 years of proactive interventions, documented problems I'd caught before they became disasters, estimated savings to the company. Then I showed her the emails, the meeting where Patricia told me to stop doing anything outside my job description, the work order for the sensor that sat untouched for 3 weeks, my follow-up email warning about the risk, her one-line dismissal. So you knew the sensor was likely to fail. You believed there was a significant risk, yes. And you didn't do anything to prevent it? I submitted a work order through proper channels as instructed by leadership. The appropriate licensed professionals were scheduled to address it. In 6 weeks? That was the timeline the system generated. Claire looked at me for a long moment. Mr. Davis, I'm going to ask you directly, did you deliberately allow this to happen? I met her eyes. I followed company policy exactly as directed by leadership. If the policy created gaps in our emergency response capability, that's an organizational issue, not an individual one. She wrote something in her notebook. I couldn't tell if she was impressed or disgusted, maybe both. The insurance company's report was brutal. They found that the loss was preventable. They found that company policy had created unreasonable delays in addressing a known risk. They found that leadership had been directly warned and failed to act. They denied the claim. $3.8 million. Out of pocket. Patricia was terminated within the week. Not gracefully either. I heard there was shouting. Security escorted her out with a cardboard box while the whole office watched. Tom was demoted. The CEO issued a company-wide memo about empowering employees to exercise professional judgment and creating a culture of proactive problem-solving. It was the exact opposite of everything Patricia had stood for. And me? 2 days after Patricia was fired, the interim operations director called me into her office. Her name was Sandra, and she'd been with the company for 15 years. Marcus, she said, I've been looking at your file. Your actual file, not the version Patricia was working from. She slid a paper across her desk. It was a list of every problem I'd prevented over 6 years. The HVAC compressor I'd caught before it failed, the elevator I kept running, the roof drain I cleared before it could cause water damage. All of it documented, all of it time-stamped. You saved this company hundreds of thousands of dollars, Sandra said, and when someone told you to stop, you stopped, and it cost us millions. I was following policy. I know, she smiled, but it was tired. I'm not here to punish you, Marcus. I'm here to offer you a promotion. We're creating a new position, Senior Facilities Operations Manager. Better title, better pay, and explicit authority to exercise your judgment in preventing emergencies. No more work orders sitting in queues while buildings flood. I took the job. My first act as Senior Facilities Operations Manager was implementing a new protocol. Anyone with direct knowledge of a potential system failure could escalate immediately to emergency status, regardless of their job title. No more lane discipline, no more waiting for licensed professionals while problems became disasters. Patricia wanted me to stay in my lane, so I did. And when the building flooded because no one else was watching, the company learned exactly how much my overstepping had been worth. Some lessons cost more than others. Thanks for sticking with me through this one. If you've ever had a boss who punished you for going above and beyond, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more workplace stories where the people who create stupid policies finally face the consequences. And if you've got your own malicious compliance story, one where following the rules backfired on the people who made them, send it to me. I read every submission and yours might be the next one I tell. See you in the next video.